Welcome to the Head Shepherd podcast. I'm your host, Mark Ferguson, CEO here at NextGen Agri International, where we help livestock managers get the best out of their stock. Before we get started, thank you to our two fantastic sponsors for continuing to sponsor this podcast. MSD Animal Health is perhaps better known as Cooper's Animal Health in Australia and for their Allflex range across the world, with a comprehensive suite of animal health and management products. Honiger is a one-stop shop for wool harvesting and animal fibre removal. The Honiger team have a deep understanding of livestock agriculture, backed by Swiss engineering and a family business dedicated to manufacturing the best. We are grateful to our sponsors for their support, helping us bring Head Shepherd to you each week. And now it's time to get on with this week's episode. G'day and welcome to Head Shepherd. You're with Ferg. Hope 2025 continues to treat you well. This week on the show, I wanted to have a bit of a chat about worm resistance or drench resistance in internal parasites, something that caused a bit of stress around the place, and rightly so. Really snuck up on quite a few people in New Zealand, particularly, but is a problem all everywhere we go, really. So I thought we'd just take a bit of time today to discuss a few of the key attributes. Most of them are probably known, but I guess just a reminder on maybe the priority order of how to approach that particular problem, or working out whether you have got a problem. Before we get into that today, I just wanted to quickly have a shout out to Amy Lockwood, who's written a great article on the Hub, the hub.nextgenagri.com. Jump on there and have a look. The title's around the benefits of pregnancy scanning and reaping the benefits of pregnancy scanning. Again, this is not all new information. It's really just reminding us that it's an absolutely fantastic management tool that sheep producers need to all be using. And in New Zealand, it is pretty widely used. Pregnancy scanning for multiples we're talking about, not just wet drying. But in Australia, there's still over half the sheep producers that actually aren't pregnancy scanning for multiples. And some recent work coming out of AWI and MLA's analysis of the cost benefit of preg scanning that Amy points out is $5.55 per ewe, representing sort of over 400% return on investment in that process. So a massive upside to doing it. And that's not just not working out what the number is and then going off to the pub and telling someone about it. That's by, if you know who's a single and who's a twin and you manage them appropriately, the improvements in lamb survival and the improvements in efficiency that you get from knowing that and using that information. So, quite a significant opportunity there. It is simply just the thing to do if you're running sheep and you're serious about it, to really understand how to meet their energy needs and manage those individuals as appropriately as you can as individuals, rather than a mob of mixed dryers, singles and twins. I guess that leads me on to the precision sheep management work we're doing, again with AWI and MLA, and we're subcontracted by Adelaide Uni, and there's a range of others as well that are working on that project. But just a quick reminder that survey is out there. There's a pair of Rowan Williams boots on the line. It's about to close, so if you do want to get in there and give us your thoughts on some of the precision sheep management, so how you're using individual management or how you'd like to in the future, we'd love to get your views on that so that we can really guide that project to meet the needs of Australian sheep producers. That is focused on Australians, so sorry to all those that are listening, you won't be eligible for the RM William boots, but those in Oz will be, so jump in there and do that survey. There's a link in the show notes, or if you've signed up to our newsletter, there's a link in there. A quick plug for our newsletter. You can sign up via our website. We are every fortnight sending out a newsletter which gives you all the information that we've sort of put together for that period of time, the articles that have been written, and the podcasts that have been completed, the any videos that we've put up. It's all in there. It's the place to find out what NextGen Agri are up to. So obviously that's free. Jump on there and have a read, or sign up. We'd love to be in your inbox once every fortnight. Right, so today we want to dive into drench resistance and just wander through a bit of a chat around that. We haven't got a guest on today. You're just listening to me and my thoughts. Apologies for that, but every now and again we like to just stop and provide a bit of a thought piece rather than the interview style that we often do here at Head Shepherd. And again, we're all ears for your feedback, whether you like this style or whether you'd rather interviews or the combo's good. We'd love to know. I guess if we start with where we are right now across Australia and New Zealand, we're seeing widespread resistance to all of the major drench classes. There's obviously a couple of new actives out there that haven't been used as much, but there's no evidence that they'll be any different. The parasites will evolve more quickly than the sheep can, or the chemicals can change, and so we will eventually see resistance to all classes of drenches if we use them inappropriately. I guess that may be what's happening on the odd farm, but what we've seen in New Zealand particularly is it's way more widespread than it was. And I guess if you're sitting there thinking my drenches are still working fine, well, I think that's probably something you want to test, and because it is worth knowing whether just exactly how effective your drench groups are. There's plenty of people out there that have got a bit of resistance problem that haven't really worked that out yet. And like all things in ag, the more we know, the better equipped we can be to fight. And if you're sitting there thinking you got 99% efficiency or efficacy in your drenches, then but you actually got 80%, then you'd be still killing some worms, still knocking back some of that worm population, but obviously not to the level that you are expecting from that treatment. So yeah, and it's really important to know. And I think the first thing to do is really start monitoring. If you haven't done a drench test for a while, like in the last 2 or 3 years, then I think that's probably the best place to start. Get out there, ring your vet up, or talk to someone who knows how to set one of those up, and do a proper test for your drench groups. That's being armed with that information is really key, and so yeah, definitely recommend that. That would have been recommended hundreds of times to you, no doubt, but still we've got lots of farms out there who have no real idea of how they're working. Obviously you can do that a bit rough and ready, as in drench them all and then test the mob sort of 3 weeks later and see if they've bounced really quickly back, or a couple of weeks later, which say 2 weeks later before the worm cycle's gone around again. So you shouldn't have any adult females laying eggs after a couple of weeks of a drench, or there should be very few there. And so, yeah, that's a rough and ready one. But obviously the best way is to actually get some advice from a vet or an animal health drench specialist and set up a proper trial where you actually do some test all the different actives and work out where you're at on the farm. So yeah, get in there and do that for sure. I guess the thing that you would expect me naturally to go to is genetics, and I'm definitely going to go there, but I won't go immediately there. We might just talk about, I guess, some of the other tools we've got, and I think monitoring is, again, not just your drench resistance drench efficacy. Doing that every few years is really important, but equally just having regular worm egg counts on your sheep is so important, because everyone sort of might reach for the drench gun because the animals aren't doing, but if there's no worms there, then like there might be something else going on, or there mightn't be there might be a light burden, and we just need to be less, I guess, drench happy and being more targeted with when we're using those chemicals and on which animals we're using them on and under which circumstances, because as always, we're not talking about moving away from drenching, obviously. We're talking about using it on the animals that actually need it and not using it on the animals that don't. And that concept of refugia that you would have heard plenty about is so important. And I think some people have really got their head around it, and that is not drenching everything in the mob, obviously, and making sure you've got mechanisms to leave some worms untreated by the chemicals. And I guess all of what I'm talking about today is all about how we expose less of the parasites to the chemicals that we need to kill them, because every time they do get exposed, we put some selection pressure on those animals to be resistant to that chemical. Obviously, Darwinism is alive and well in the parasite population, so the survival of the fittest. So the worm that is most adaptable and can adapt to those chemicals and live and therefore move on to reproduce is the one that obviously is resistant to the drench. And then that obviously builds up over time as our drenches select out the genetics that are susceptible to that drench. We end up with all the worms that possess the genetics to not be impacted by that drench, or not to the same extent. And so all of our monitoring, all of our processes are all about thinking about that. How do we not put chemical on top of every worm more often? We're trying to breed up a population of worms that haven't seen a drench before, that are naive to that drench. And I think that's the way to get in your mind about this process, and that's really critical. And I guess the way we can do that is sort of watering down that resistant population, and that's by not treating every animal and every mob. And you will have heard about that before, going through and only condition scoring at the same time and only drenching the ones that are actually light, because we know that a dry animal in pretty good condition on okay nutrition will have a natural resistance to worms, will fight those worms itself. And so we give that immune system the best fighting chance by giving good nutrition, having good condition score. But the animals that are in that mob that are less so, are in lighter condition, we know they're going to be more susceptible to all diseases, including worms. So they might be the one that will get a drench, and so you might improve the average worm burden in that mob because you've let the fat ones do it themselves, and you let the skinny one, you're giving the skinny ones a hand by giving out a bit of chemical support. So I think that's the core principle there. How you actually achieve that is up to the individual farm and what your animal health plan looks like, but definitely refugia has to be part of what you're doing, and that might be running some old ewes or some old wethers or something in with your lambs, because you might not want to do refugia in your growing lambs because you know that they're the most susceptible. But either through your rotations, as in we've got old ewes following around those lambs so that they're chewing up those worms and then not being treated with the drenches, and then their immune system is actually fighting the worms, and so you break that cycle and have less drench resistance forming. Or you have them running with the mob, and there's different ways of doing that. But it is critical that every time you're using a drench, that some of the animals in that system somewhere aren't being exposed to that same treatment, whether that's in the mob, the bigger ones in the mob, or whether that's a different mob that you know is coming onto that pasture. And I think having those farm maps, which everyone's sort of getting much better at these days, and there's great tools out there to have that all digital farm maps, and a lot easier than maybe it was 10 years ago. You kind of got to have in your head what risk that pasture is. What was there last? Like, was it a young group of lambs that were full of worms, or was it some lambing ewes that were full of worms? And when were that there? Like, obviously, the longer the gap you leave it, the more of those larvae hatch and don't find a host to go into. And obviously, those larval counts start dropping back. You can get them back to zero with cropping and other things where there's no sheep in there for a long time. But you've got to expect that unless it's a new farm that's been cropped for 10 years and hasn't seen a sheep, then every place on the farm will have some worm burden. It's just that some are a lot hotter than others, and trying to work out what you put where is critical. So having that plan around where animals are going, so you can't sort of do this on the fly. You've got to have a bit of a thought process. So it needs to be part of your grazing plan, needs to be aware of those, how do I get out of those worms? And on New Zealand farms, obviously there's the great option of cattle. Not all sheep farms in Australia will have cattle as well. In fact, not that many of them. It's more common to have one or the other than both. But on those mixed places where you do have both, it's fantastic to use those cattle. Obviously, the worms don't cross-contaminate. And so a cow hoovering up a heap of pasture that's got a heap of larvae from sheep on it has no impact on the cow, but does a great job of really reducing the contamination of that pasture and killing off a heap of those L3s. So those larvae get knocked off by those cows. So that's a absolute critical option, I think, is having those rotations in place. Ideally, there's cattle in that rotation, but equally adult sheep that are dry can perform a bit of that role because they're less. They've got a better immune system to fight the worm, so you can use that a bit. Obviously, there's a couple of times where you really are having to rely on the chemicals. Going into lambing is one of those times. Often, not always, not all systems, but that's when the sheep will the adult sheep will lose their immunity to worms. So the periparturient rise in egg counts, it's called, and that's just the immune system shutting down right on that point of lambing and early lactation. Obviously, the parasites then get a good run on because they're not being impacted by the immune system, and you get a big lift in egg counts. Obviously, unfortunately, that means that those young lambs, as they're coming out starting to graze on pasture, are exposed to lots of eggs or lots of larvae. And so that's one of the big challenges in our system. So often people will reach for a treatment just prior to, as the animals are set stocked onto their lambing pastures. Often they'll be getting a long-acting then. Obviously, that long-acting space has changed a lot in recent years, and people are sort of getting their head around how we get away without that. And that will be around condition score management and thinking about what those pastures those sheep are on, how long they've been spelled, that sort of stuff, to kind of get a whole system in place where you're not having to reach for those long-acting chemicals because, again, they do put pressure on resistance. Yeah, so but then growing stock is the other one where you can't really afford refugia in animals that you're wanting to grow and get out the door. So it's, again, about how do we get clean pastures, how do I rotate other things. I can use my chemicals on those young sheep, but make sure I've got a strategy in place to graze those same pastures with adult sheep in good condition or with some cattle or something just to decontaminate that pasture after we know that those young sheep have been through and probably loaded them up with larvae. The other thing is obviously with grazing management is how we graze and how low to the ground we graze. Obviously, it's not always possible to be grazing higher up in the sward, but we know where the worms live. They all live in that sort of below 5 centimetre level is where they love to be. It's nice and moist in there. There's lots of, they don't get exposed to sunlight, they don't get exposed to heat as much. And so in a green sward at sort of in that lower area, that's where you're going to get a higher density of larvae. Obviously, the further you go up, the less of them there are, and to a point there's sort of none up there, and varies a little bit. But basically, the higher you're grazing with sheep, the less often they're having to graze into that really hot zone of larvae. And so that's one management strategy. And I know there's plenty of people out there use their rotation length and stocking density to do that well, and then maybe follow up with something else to maybe chew that pasture down, whether it's a dry sheep mob or it's cattle or whatever, and your higher importance animals aren't being driven to eat right into that lower area where all the worms are. So that's one strategy. Again, not always possible depending on whether it rains or not and how much feed you got. Sometimes they are eating pretty close to the ground, and we know that that's going to be loading them up with worms. But where possible to get away from that, you can have a big impact on how many worms are impacting your sheep by just how hard they're having to graze into that hot zone of larvae. Right, that's enough of sort of skirting around the edges. I suppose we can talk about genetics now, and the worm resistance breeding values are fantastic and have really changed the game for lots of people. So worm feck in New Zealand or worm egg count in Australia, there's breeding values available across all the animals we deal with, all the sheep we deal with, and they work. They're based on egg counting, which again is a bit of a rubbery tool, but what we've seen after years and years of monitoring this stuff is if we start using those negative breeding valued animals, the ones with lower breeding values for worm egg count or fecal worm egg count, we definitely change our reliance on chemicals because the animal is more likely to switch that resistance, its own resistance on, and fight those worms without having to have some chemical support. So it's a great tool for changing the game. And what we have seen already this year has been a lot of ram buyers who have had some trouble with Drench resistance. They're getting really seriously focused on the worm egg count breeding values or fecal egg count breeding values, depending on which system you're in, and really honing in on that, which is great to see, and a really good strategy. If this is you, or if part of your long-term economic sort of strategy around worms has to be having a group of animals that are less susceptible to this parasite. What we have seen is that it seems to be you select against, like their worms don't get resistant to the sheep being resistant. Like it's a systematic attack on the worm, and so they can't actually build a resistance to that as far as we know anyway. It's pretty moderately heritable, sort of 20-25% depending on the population. So it's not super high, but it's not super low. It's not really correlated with much. You can make gain on worm egg count, fecal worm egg count, quite happily without having any real negative impact with anything else. In some populations, there was that unfavourable correlation with DAG, where low worm egg count animals had a bit more DAG, and I think that may play out if you don't watch it. What we would always encourage people to do is select for DAG at the same time as egg count. And so you get a low DAG animal that is low worm egg count as well. So that's a real strategy to hook into just to make sure. So that's the only real thing you got to watch when you're selecting for that. So when you're buying your rams, get out there and really focus in on that worm egg count breeding value and really encourage that. Some people use Carla. Again, it's a saliva test based on an antibody response to the larvae, not to obviously the worm egg count breeding values are counting the eggs and therefore how many adult females are laying those eggs, which is rubbery because an egg count doesn't always reflect the number of worms that are there. Carla relies on having just a larval challenge. So if they're chewing larvae, and then you'll see an antibody response, and that can be measured in saliva. So that's a much cleaner way to test for worm, and that some stud breeders are doing. And then SwabTech have got their technology coming online as well in Australia, which we'll yet to see turn into a breeding value, but hopefully we'll see that soon. And yeah, so there's other mechanisms out there. The breeding values currently are either in Carla in New Zealand plus worm feck, or in Australia it's all based on worm egg count. So yeah, but they all have different horses for different purposes, I suppose, or different ways of working, but they're all effective. I think the work shows that currently the worm egg counting is the best breeding value for making genetic gain but pretty closely correlated with Kala. So in most circumstances, not every circumstance I've seen. And so, yeah, there are a couple of good options when you're buying your rams to make sure you're looking at that. Get yourself, I guess, knowledgeable enough around that data to know what's good and what's bad, because it can be a little bit counterintuitive. You're looking for a kind of lower worm egg count number, or and so more negative. So you've got to make sure you've got your head around that. Colours are completely different units. So again, you've got to get your head around that. So that's key. I guess the other thing I wanted to cover here on genetics is often sometimes we see farms that go, right, we're really going to get into this worm stuff, and they just stop drenching all adult sheep basically, and that's okay. But unless you've actually bred some resistance into those animals, or know that you've got a bit of genetic resistance in there, then it is quite risky to do that. It's not. I mean, I don't think the bank manager would like to see that. It's sort of like you have to use all these tools when you're ready, and stopping drenching might not be the thing for you. It might be just reducing drenching in the sheep that don't need it. I think that's a much better plan than just stopping completely. And then as you build up your genetic resistance, then maybe it is that adult animals don't get drenched, and we've seen plenty of people transition through that. But you just have to do it in a structured way. You don't want to lose lots of production potential and therefore money by, I guess, just going, right, we're going to stop drenching and see those that survive and see those that thrive under that situation. Much better to put all the emphasis on the rams that you're buying and making sure that you're bringing those genes in a structured way. And then when the time is ready, then you can start dropping drenches out of those adult ewes and maybe even young sheep. But make sure you do that in the right timing. Get those good rams in there and get it done quickly. I was asked the other day how long it takes to get resistance into your flock, as in genetic resistance, and it's kind of how long's a piece of string, how hard do you go? And I think, like all things, if you went out and bought a whole new ram team with this trait in mind, then next year you'll have an impact. Whereas if you just buy a couple of rams now and over the next 10 years you swap that ram team over, then it will take you 15 or 20 years to make the gains. So it is really in your hands as to how hard you go on this sort of trait. Obviously, you have to bring other traits with it as you go. Luckily, it's not correlated with much, so you can kind of do that. There is options there. So, yeah, but I think the answer is, if you want to go fast, then change as many rams over as you can, as fast as you can to these traits, rather than sort of continuing to use some of those old rams. Go back and do a ram team audit within your current rams. There'll be some that are very positive for worm egg count maybe, and they're the ones to get rid of. Like all genetics, you're just shifting the bell curve, and so if you take some out of the wrong part of the bell curve, it's just as good as adding new ones to the good part of the bell curve. It has the same impact. So have a think about that, a ram team audit. Think hard about the rams you buy. I think try and see if you can stretch the budget to buy a few more to change some over if you've got some positives in there, some animals that are still unfavourable for worm egg count. You want to be getting rid of them, because we know that they'll find worms where there isn't any, whereas others will be fighting them for you. So a few strategies there. Again, none of them particularly brand new, but important to bring it all together. Again, sort of covered off on egg counting, but I think it is key to whether you get your own system on farm to monitor more regularly, or you just make sure you continue sending those samples into your vet or into your local ag distributor that's doing a bit of egg counting. The more you get done, or the more often you get done, and the more mobs you do, the better you go. But I do really like the on-farm systems, particularly for bigger farmers or bigger sheep producers out there that have got plenty of stock, and you can kind of go and get it done, send it away before those sheep are going back into the paddock, or even on the way in, you can kind of get a sample and get it tested, so you can build it in with other jobs. Yeah, and I think the people that have those sort of systems, that gear where you can do it yourself, most people that have really lent into that really enjoy the fact that they can kind of be testing all the time without a massive expense, but also having just the right information to act on every chance you have. So I guess just summing that up into what we would see that every farm could do this year, and I reckon one is get your baseline data, work out what your drench efficacy is. So if you haven't done that in the last 2 or 3 years, then that's your priority to get out of here and ring your vet or ring someone that can do that. Give us a call, we'll set you in the right direction. Second, I reckon it's start if you're buying rams, make sure you're using those breeding values for worm egg count or Kala, depending on what your ram breeder is doing. Make sure that's part of your strategy if you haven't already, and you are someone that drenching fairly regularly, then definitely that's got to be part of your future. And then I guess thirdly, you can start thinking about your farm as in hot zones. and like red zones and orange zones and green zones for where the worms are, based on the grazing history. If I had skinny lambs in there, I know that had a heap of eggs per gram. I know there's plenty of larvae there if I put something back in there. So kind of thinking about what that looks like on each paddock is really, really key. I guess just a quick reminder that we're not talking about eliminating drenching. We're not talking about eliminating worms. It's just how do we use these chemicals, and the story is, and whether, well, I guess we'll wait and see. But it looks like there's not many new actives coming onto our system, so we kind of have to use the ones we've got to the best of our ability. And so it's using all of the tools in the shed as usual. It's the integrated pest management approach. IPM is really what we have to do here. And again, we can't just fight worms and lose all our productivity. So we kind of it's still trying to do this while trying to grow animals fast and do all the things that we know that we need to do. So yeah, it's not easy. Hopefully, there's been a few tips in there that are useful. Hopefully, it's sparked a few memories of a few things that you know that you should do that you haven't been doing. So yeah, and I guess the thing right now is really lean into that to those worm egg count breeding values. I think they are our ticket to change, particularly in fine wool sheep, but in all sheep. Yeah, I think there's huge opportunity there for the industry just to keep pushing the limits on that. So hope that's been useful. Over and out for now, and thanks for listening. Quickly before I do shut down, I just wanted to a quick shout out to Willie Broughton. Might be listening down there at Lawn Peak Station. I caught up with his girlfriend Millie Nolan this week for a beer, which was good fun. And yeah, she mentioned that Willie's a long time listener, so I just thought I'd give him a shout out. I love hearing stories of people that have listened to lots of episodes and have got something out of it. And it sounds like Willie's one of them. So thanks, Willie. I hope you're listening. Anyway, that's it for today. We'll look forward to catching up next time on Head Shepherd. Thanks again to Heineken, who are proud world leaders in the manufacturing and supply of professional sheep shearing and clipping equipment. Thank you to MNSD Animal Health and Norflex Livestock Intelligence. They offer an extensive livestock product portfolio focused on animal health management, all backed up by exceptional service. We thank both of these companies for their ongoing support of the Head Shepherd podcast.